Hey, gang. Welcome to our first full interview of season two. This is really very exciting for me. We are continuing the Australia chat. So if you're sick about hearing about it, I'm sorry. Again, it's my personality now. I'm the girl that's gone to Australia. I have a really special guest today, and I can't believe we made this work, but we did. Anna is from the Lone Pine Koala Sanctuary. That's where I met her when I was down there in Brisbane. And she actually is American. So we're going to be talking about moving from America to Australia. Thankfully, she got out right before Trump was in office. She got out right before COVID cranked up. I mean, obviously, Australia was hit with COVID too, but they handled it very differently from the US. So we're going to talk about that as well. But Anna, thank you so much for joining me. This is so cool.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was hard to schedule with time changes and work schedules. So I'm on a Friday morning, and for you, it's Thursday night. So I'm glad
Yes.
we made it work.
Yes, I was going to mention that because I do try to explain to people the time difference because I'm like, yeah, they're 14 hours ahead. So I explain it as on my flight back. So I said I left on the 29th at 11 a.m. from Sydney. I got to LA on the 29th at 6 a.m. And then I got to JFK on the 29th at 9 p.m. So,
Yeah, so you went backwards in time and then forwards
yeah,
again. But then when you fly to Australia from the US, you lose a day. So
yeah, almost two.
I
It
think
was
I
almost
was
2 days for me.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when everybody thought the world was going to end like the 11th of November 2011 or whatever, I was flying and I like missed that day. And I remember texting everyone in the US and being like, I've made it to Australia on the other side. The world did not end.
There you go. So,
Yeah.
but you've moved around a lot. So you've lived in Tennessee, you've lived in
Yeah. So I was
Colorado.
born in San Diego.
Yep.
That's where my
Okay.
parents were from. So they were both from Southern California. And then when my dad was out of the Navy, we moved to Colorado. So that's where I grew up in Boulder and went to high school. And then I went to college at the University of South Carolina, which was a huge change from being in Colorado. But
I'll
I
bet.
actually initially, I really wanted to go to California where my parents were from, but it was just the schools there are so expensive. So I started looking like in the Southeast and other places where it was really warm. I just basically never wanted to see snow again after growing
That's
up in
fair.
Colorado. So fell in love with the University of South Carolina and that very like cliche college experience, like a big football team and, lots of college clubs and events and Greek life. And yeah, then went to grad school at Vanderbilt in Nashville.
Nice.
My husband in Utah in the midst of between college and grad school. And then he came to Nashville with me, and then I followed him to Australia. So I'm
Okay,
now
well, so let's
just
talk
north of
about
Brisbane.
that. Let's talk about that. So how did you guys meet and what were you both doing in Utah at the time?
Yeah. So when I finished college, I was I think like every kid at the age of 22 who's just spent all their time and money, in college. And like, I majored in anthropology. So what the hell was I ever going to do with that? So decided to move or go back to Colorado and just spend some time at home and figure out what was next for me and got a job at a ski resort. So spent one season at a ski resort in Colorado, and that was pretty fun in your young 20s. It's a lot of, snowboarding all day, partying all night. It
There you
was it
go.
was quite fun. And then decided to do a second season in Park City in Utah, which I had just visited. We had like a reciprocity program. So if you were working at a ski resort, you could go visit other ones. And I really loved Park City. And so moved there. And Shane, who's my husband now, was doing a working holiday. So he grew up on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland and was over there with some friends. His plan was to be there for about 6 months for a ski season and then about 6 months of traveling the US. And we met in the middle of that ski season and thought we had, a few months to be together before his visa ended and fell pretty hard for each other. I mean, his accent just
I
really got
mean,
me.
for
So
real.
yeah. So we spent the ski season together and then we sort of always had like a deadline. Like it was like, okay, this visa is going to end. What can we do to make it last for 6 more months? So, he'd get a tourist visa or a work visa. And then it was like, I decided to go to grad school. So then he ended up getting a working visa so he could stay in the US for 2 years. And then, yeah, we sort of always just like kind of made the next stage work. And so we met in the snow. He decided to follow me to grad school. We moved to Nashville together. That was fun. Nashville is a fun place to live in your early 20s. We had a great time while I was going to school, got my master's in education, and then basically applied for my visa as soon as I finished grad school. So I had always told him, if you find a way to live in the US with me, I'll move over to Australia, and then we'll be able to compare the lifestyle in both and decide where we want to live long term. And I was in Australia for about 3 minutes before I was like, yeah, this is it. This is where we will live.
So, and you had never been to Australia before that? You just
not before I met him. So I came twice before I got my visa, like to meet his family and stuff. So I had been over to see him. So we did have one stint in between his visas where he had to come back for about 4 months. So I came and visited him for a month during that. I came during my Christmas break, my first year of grad school. And then we came the following year just to like see family and visit. And then I got my visa the year after that. So I had been twice, but just for like vacations.
Right. That's awesome though. And a working visa is extremely common with Australians. I mean, I worked in a mall when I was 16, and every summer where there was always Australians coming in, and it's like, oh, what are you here for? Oh, I'm working at this camp, or I'm working at that camp. We're here for 3 months. And it was always like such a crazy concept to me. I'm like, how do you just do that? Like, how do you just pack up and decide I'm going to work here? But it's a thing, and it's a very common thing. And I think that's super cool. And it gives people a chance to see the world and to see what else is out there. And it's pretty awesome. Hats off to your husband for doing that.
Yeah, I've definitely found that, I mean, with young people and just with older people, like people in Australia want to travel and they want to see the world, and they definitely work to live. So it is a very like work hard, play hard attitude in Australia. Yeah. So a lot of young people, take gap years or go do a working holiday like my husband did, where, they can spend 9 months or a year over in Australia. Like if they're in college or just out of college. And yeah, it's really cool. And the US has like a bit of an exchange with Australia. So it's a little bit easier to get a visa if you're from Australia. So when he was getting his proper work visa after his working holiday, it was a little bit easier for him than I think it would have been for people from some other nations and stuff. So yeah, we were lucky that all worked out. And like I said, we always were just sort of like, how can you stay for 1 more year? How can you stay for 6 more months? And yeah, we just kept making it work. And now we met in 2012. So now it's been 12 years that we've been making it work.
That's awesome. And so you said you got your teaching degree, you were a teacher. What age group were you teaching?
I worked at a Montessori school. So we've got mixed age classrooms. So generally in each classroom, there's 2 adults because you've got such a combination of ages. So there's a lead teacher and an assistant teacher. So after I got my master's in Nashville, I just needed a job wherever I could get one. Because at that point I was waiting on my visa. So I kind of was told, this could take 6 to 18 months and then you're gonna have to pack up your life and leave. So I kind of just was going to take a job wherever. And there was a Montessori school literally down the street from me. And I just went in there and they needed a classroom assistant. So I started with really little kids, like kindergarten. And then when I moved to Australia, because I had that background, I looked for Montessori schools here, and there happened to be one about 20 minutes away. And it's quite hard to find people that have experience with Montessori. So I had a bit of a leg up. And so I worked there with kindy and prep. So that's pretty much the equivalent of kindergarten in the year before, like pre-kindergarten in America.
Yeah.
So my
pre-K.
Yeah, like 4 to 6. Did that for 3 years and then worked in the next cycle for 5 years. So 6 to 9. So first, second, and third grade as the teaching assistant. And that was really, I loved that school. Leaving to go to Lone Pine, even though I love my job at Lone Pine, was quite hard. So yeah.
That's why, and it's so wild because my sister and I both attended Montessori school for kindergarten. My sister went all the way up until I want to say 2nd or 3rd grade. So it was really cool when I was down in Sydney, especially when I was walking around the city. They have a huge Montessori academy, and I actually took a picture of it to show my mom, like, look, they have Montessori down here too. So it's just so funny that it's still a prevalent thing and it's everywhere. So that was really neat to see.
Montessori school is literally like the next suburb over from Lone Pine. Like I hit the traffic from it all the time. So it's a cool system. It's very unique. And it took me a long time to sort of figure out the ins and outs of it. But once you realize, how incredible and just how classic the learning styles are. I mean, Montessori started 150 years ago is when Maria Montessori was figuring all of her teaching methods out. And it's definitely withstood the test of time and adapted to modern technologies. And it was a really, really great place for me to find myself in while I was.
Well, and now we've got, magnet schools cropping up everywhere. And I think a lot of magnet schools are loosely based on, what Montessori was trying to do and has successfully done. But sadly, they always have like that bougie corporate edge to them. And it's like, okay, it's like Mean Girls, like you can't come here. But whereas Montessori is like, come on, if you want to learn, it's a really great school. So, exactly. So if no one knows anything about Montessori, look into it. It's pretty awesome. I'm really thankful for the time I had there. My Aunt Linda worked at the one that I went to. So that's kind of how I knew about it and got into it when I was little. And then, like I said, my sister went to a different one and she was there for quite a few more years than I was. So it's, cool. It's pretty awesome.
There's a bit of like like camaraderie when you meet other people who are familiar with Montessori.
Yeah. Because it's not something that's mentioned often. So. Exactly. Yeah. So you were teaching for, I think you said, for what, 7, 8 years before you went to Lone Pine?
8 years in Nashville and then 8 years here in Australia.
Okay. And you learned about Lone Pine through teaching? Like you guys did field trips there or?
Yeah. So I learned about Lone Pine because when I came to Australia, like when I was visiting the first couple times, obviously my first priority was to go see kangaroos and koalas. Like,
sure. Yeah.
I was telling my husband, like, I want to see you, but also I just want to go see the animals. So my first trip to Australia, we did Australia Zoo. I held a koala. I fed the kangaroos. And then the second time I came to Australia, we went to Lone Pine because wanted to see animals, but decided, we'd go somewhere different. And yeah, Lone Pine's really beautiful. We're called a koala sanctuary. So it's just got a little bit more sanctuary vibes, whereas Australia Zoo really hones in on, their history with the crocodile hunter and which is incredible. And what his kids are doing now is pretty amazing. But yeah, it's just a totally different vibe. We don't have any exotics. So we don't have any animals outside of Australia, only natives. But even though I was familiar with Lone Pine, getting a job there was sort of, a lot of dominoes falling into place. I don't know if you want that story now, but
I do. Yes, please.
Okay. We'll get into it. So I was teaching. I loved my teaching. I loved my classroom co-teacher. She ended up becoming such a good friend and a mentor. And she'd been at that Montessori school for like 20 years, like basically since we opened. And
oh, wow.
We'd been in the same classroom for 5 years. And to work with someone in really close proximity every single day with 25 screaming children for 5 years and to still like each other is very rare. So I was pretty much like, I'm going to stay in this job forever as long as my teaching partner stays with me.
Sure. Yeah.
But, I've always been interested in animals, and Australian animals are incredible. And I just found that my students just were so unaware of the incredible things in their own backyard and how to care for them, and that you're not going to find these animals anywhere else. So if we don't care for the koalas and they aren't existing in Australia, they're not going to exist anywhere. So we got to care for them and, know what to do if we find an injured one and how to look for them. And so we actually had a company come in and do an incursion. So this was during COVID. So they brought animals to the school, and they were actually doing it for the younger kids, the little prep children, so kindergarten. And my teaching partner came in and said, Anna, there's a wombat in the library. And I was like, excuse me, what? A real wombat? She said, yeah, there's a wombat in the library. And my class was at PE. They were at gym. So I was like, cool. Our classroom's empty for the next hour. I'm going to go see the wombat in the library. So I sat and watched with the preps this little wildlife presentation. And as the guy was packing up at the end, I said, oh, do you need any help packing up? And he's like, can you hold the wombat while I pack up? And I was
sure
like,
can.
Yeah, I could probably do that. So I just sat there with this wombat on my lap, just like in tears, having the greatest moment of my life. And then as I was helping him pack up the car, I just said, this is what I want to do. I want to work with animals and work with children and teach kids about how to look for animals, how to care for animals, how to begin to be conscientious about conservation. And he basically said, our business has taken a really big hit.
Sure.
We aren't going out to nearly as many schools. I've had to let all my staff go. It's literally just my wife and I running the business. And I said, look, you don't have to pay me, but I just need someone to just teach me about animals and how to handle them and how to care for them. And he said, shoot me an email, maybe we can get in touch. And I think he probably thought he'd never see me again. And I waited like a week, like the 3-date rule. Like I don't want to email you too quick, but and I emailed him and said, this is Anna. I met you at school. Would love to meet with you and talk more about your educational offerings. And so then he said, come on over. You can meet my wife and see the animals. And yeah, from there, I just kind of really persistently would email him every couple of weeks and say, what's going on with the business? Do you need any help? So he started having me tag along to different little events on the weekends and going out to community festivals. And I remember the first time I helped him, he was like, can you go grab the little green tree snake out of the blue bag and bring it out? And I had never, handled a snake besides for like a photo op where they put it on you. And I just thought to myself, fake it till you make it, Anna. Like, so I just went and grabbed the snake. Tree snakes are really small. They're maybe like 2 feet long, quite skinny. And so it was like climbing all over me and I was just loving it. And then people were asking me questions and I was just pulling out everything I knew about snakes. So started working with him a lot on the weekends and the school holidays and just volunteering and then going over to his place, once a week to help with feeding and cleaning and just seeing how he took care of his animals. And he's worked in every aspect of the animal industry that you could imagine. I mean, any animal you mention, he's got a story of how he saved one or, was on a breeding program and bred the first one. This gentleman has just decades of experience. He knows everyone. And the fact that he was willing to, respond to me and take a chance on me, I don't know what I would have done without him. So many people come up to us at events and say, how do you get this job? How do you do this? And I always think, why did you actually take a chance on me out of these hundreds of people that come up? And so, I was having a really good time doing that and teaching. And then he knew a lot of people at Lone Pine and they were recruiting in their education department. And I actually was at an event with him and the curator from Lone Pine, who's like the head of everything animal related. So building exhibits, bringing in new animals, everything, was at that event. And the guy I was working with said, oh, this is Anna. She is looking for a job at Lone Pine. And everything just sort of fell into place. And the education team was recruiting. So I sent in an application. And then when I actually got the interview and got hired, I had like a complete conniption over, I actually love my job teaching, but I really think this is what I want to do. And, I'd been in school for 8 years. So I wasn't under a microscope. I was trusted to do my job well and to start over and be the new person and have to go through training and, evaluations. And I was really, really scared, but I've now been at Lone Pine for about 10 months and it is truly like my dream job. There is something to be said for loving going to work every day. And incredible.
Well, and I should mention, so the reason that I met Anna, and we actually bonded a little bit over Taylor Swift, but I was doing 3 animal encounters at Lone Pine that day, and she happened to be the person that was taking me to every encounter. So the very first one of the day was with 3 different owls. It was the owl experience. So I met a barn owl and I met 2 barking owls. But when Anna first came to get me for the experience, she's like, are you here all day? Like, are you doing multiple things? Cause I printed out my list of events and like every other one is like Elizabeth. I was like, yeah, I'm doing a couple things. So she's like, okay, I'll be seeing you throughout the day. Cause I'm the one taking everybody around. I was like, okay, cool. So that's cool. I have a point of reference, whatever, someone to talk to. And it was neat, fellow American. It was like, oh, wow. It was just so cool to hear. Like, you could tell how enthusiastic you are about the job, about the animals. You can tell. And well, so let's start with this. What would you say is the difference? Because so we have the Bronx Zoo here. We have the Beardsley Zoo here in Connecticut. But the Bronx Zoo is like it's my zoo. That's where we went on school trips. And that's where, we went every summer with the family. And they do conservation. They're very big on conservation. They do have an animal hospital, as far as I know, but they don't let the public check it out. For the longest time, they weren't doing any animal encounters whatsoever. I think they've recently started doing that. But of the 2 zoos and then the sanctuary that I went to, they all had hospitals. They were all taking in injured animals. They're all very focused on helping out native animals in particular that are brought in. So what would you say is the difference between a zoo and a sanctuary?
I think at Lone Pine, it was just our origins. So zoos open primarily, I mean, they have many purposes: education, conservation, and tourism. And so, when a zoo opens, they're going to consider how many guests are going to come visit, what are our ticket prices going to be, how are we going to, fund the care of these animals. But Lone Pine started just as a place for animals. So when Lone Pine opened, it was 1927. We're nearly 100 years old. So it's actually the world's first and largest koala sanctuary. So when we opened, there was actually a pretty prolific fur trade around koalas. And here in Queensland, they sort of just declared open season and people could just go get a koala and get money for its fur. And we were losing hundreds of thousands of koalas every month. So that lasted throughout the 1800s, the early 1900s. And when Lone Pine opened, its intention was to be a facility for orphaned and injured koalas as a result of that fur trade. When we first opened, we only had 2 koalas. So there wasn't a focus on tourism and guest interaction and people coming in. We were opening for koalas. And obviously now we're a much larger facility. We house lots of different Australian animals. We've got about 70 different species and about 400 animals in total, including over 100 koalas and over 100 kangaroos. But yeah, I think probably the main difference between a zoo and a sanctuary is sort of just that initial intention. Lone Pine now, we have thousands of guests visit. We are pretty similar in terms of what we offer to a zoo. You go and you see the animals in their exhibit and you can see our hospital through the windows. You can sign up for animal encounters. But when we opened, our priority was those animals. And even now, even though we offer encounters and stuff, the animals always have an element of choice. So if they are indicating that they don't want to do it that day, our priority maintains, to this day, to be with the animals. And that I was a bit nervous moving into the animal industry that maybe, there was, I don't know, you see just these horrible videos with Sarah McLachlan in the background of animals in captivity. And right. I was really worried about, being a part of that. But every person that works at my sanctuary cares about animals more than people. And we have to fund the care of these animals, and people allow us to do that. But if our animals say no or give us any indication that they're uncomfortable, we will gladly, upset a human over an animal. If that means they don't get an encounter that day, sorry, our animals are our priority. And we're lucky to have enough animals and enough really good staff that generally we can accommodate. If one animal doesn't want to do something, we've usually got someone else or another offering or, another way to make it a really special day. But it's pretty incredible how much love the staff has for animals. And I love, like, at lunchtime, we're all sitting there sharing photos of animals and videos and updates on what this one's doing or this funny account we saw. Like, it's really fun working with so many like-minded people. And But yeah, there is certainly no doubt in my mind that the welfare of the animals is the absolute top priority of everybody who chooses to work in this industry. So it's pretty cool.
Well, I think I read that it was over 600,000 koalas that were killed during that rush for the fur trade.
And that's the low estimate. The high estimate is 800,000 in 1 month. 1 month.
So just to put it in perspective, and I do have friends out there. One of my friends in particular is absolutely totally anti-zoo. But what people don't understand is that if it wasn't for places like the Koala Sanctuary, the Lone Pine Sanctuary, these animals might very well have gone extinct and a lot of animals that are currently endangered. The only reason they have the numbers they have is because they're in places like zoos and sanctuaries throughout the world. But unfortunately, and again, we all learned this over COVID, unfortunately, you see places like Tiger King and the places that are in the Midwest where laws are a little more lenient on exotic animals and treatment of animals and handling of animals, certainly, that kind of gives everybody else a bad rap, unfortunately. Whereas, like I said, I grew up with the Bronx Zoo. They have definitely totally changed in leaps and bounds from what they were initially, with the stereotypical iron bars and the cold, like single rock in the middle of the exhibit where like one sad, bulimic cheetah lived, whereas, and now, now they really do care about the habitat and make. So the best example that I can give, the Bronx Zoo in particular, zoos are very big with birds. Birds are always a big deal. Like birds are everywhere in zoos, but the Bronx Zoo has a fuck ton of birds. She has a ton of birds. And the very first spot you hit when you go to the Bronx Zoo is their World of Birds. It's the very first exhibit in the entrance. And one of the very first birds you would ever see are what we used to call cheesehead birds. I apologize, I can't remember the actual name of them now, but there were two birds. They looked like they had a giant block of cheese on their head. They looked like gigantic toucans. They had a huge beak, huge body, but this big giant block of cheese on its head. And it's killing me that I can't remember the name of it. And that was always the first one you saw. And we always got, let's go see the cheesehead birds. We always got so excited. About 15, 20 years ago, they moved the birds to a nicer habitat, a bigger area. You'll never see a cheesehead bird again because they're hidden. And we look for them every year, and we're so disappointed that we don't see them anymore, but they're off, secluded in the exhibit, living their best lives. Like, we're not here to perform for you anymore. So things change. People get,
it is a hard balance. We just opened a new section of our sanctuary, and so we've got 3 eucalyptus plantations because we're feeding 100 koalas. And the smallest one is on site. The other 2 are off site, but it sort of is out the back of the sanctuary. And we actually opened this whole new section of the sanctuary that walks through the eucalyptus plantation. And we've created exhibits walking through there. But these exhibits have been left pretty much completely natural. So we've left, the long grass, the tall trees. And so people go back there and they're upset because they don't see anything. And it's like, how do you balance the welfare of the animals and giving them the best exhibit possible, but then people don't see them as much? So our solution was to start doing nocturnal tours so people can actually come out at night. And we've got special torches and cameras. And we go out and we find the animals at night. And it's super cool because not only do you see them, but you're seeing them engaging in a lot of activity and natural behaviors. They're foraging and hunting and digging burrows. But it is this hard balance of doing the best for the animals and still accommodating the people that are coming in and funding it. But one quote that I think is really important in the animal industry that I've heard a lot of people say is, you do the best you can until you know better. And then you do that. So, absolutely. 20 years ago, iron bars and 1 rock was, we're giving this animal a safe place and we're giving it food every day. But then, you learn more about natural habitats. You learn more about the importance of enrichment and keeping them, keeping their minds busy and not just their bodies getting, what they need, but giving their brains what they need and their welfare. And so, it's constantly adapting. And it is really cool to see, what zoos are doing in terms of their exhibits and their enrichment. And it's amazing. I mean, I understand that there are people out there who are, like you said, anti-zoo, and I certainly understand their intentions and where they're coming from, but it's worthwhile to really see what the facilities are doing and talk to the people, because again, when you see how much the people love the animals, you would never doubt that they're doing the best they can. And I mean, our raptors, so our big birds of prey, like our owls that you met, at least half of them came in as rescues. So what was their alternative? I mean, their alternative was that they die, or they, I don't know, somebody picks them up and decides to make them a pet and they live in a tiny, inappropriate cage. Like, we're giving these raptors opportunities to fly every day. We're giving them, ability. We've got one who had an injured foot and it's a seabird. So normally he'd be picking up really wriggly fish. But because he got wrapped up in fishing line, he can't pick up a wriggly fish because he doesn't have the foot strength. So we made him a little fish out of leather and bits and pieces. And we put it on the top of this little pond, and he can go and practice that raking behavior where they pick up fish off the top and it doesn't wriggle and it's not really heavy. But it gets him out and it gets him doing those natural behaviors. And, how can you say that that's a bad life for an animal that has already undergone something so traumatic? Like, we are giving them the best life we can.
Well, and I will say, so the Bronx Zoo, at the last time I was there, they have about 8 or 9 bald eagles, and every single one of them were rescued. Like, one is missing a wing entirely. And, they all, for whatever reason, wouldn't survive in the wild. And some people say, well, it's just, only the strong survive, whatever. But it's like, but not when you're losing numbers in droves to the point where they're endangered or unfortunately on the brink of extinction. Nobody wants that. That's humans.
Not, like, sorry, you have, an autoimmune disease, you're not strong enough to survive. Like we have hospitals, we have like medical
right. Sure. That's a great point, actually. Yeah. And listen, those animals are eating good, y'all. When I was doing the owl thing, the barn owl was getting, they put a whole mouse foot in my hand at one point for him to eat. Like they're eating good over there. They're living a good life. And I will say, and I did go through that nocturnal exhibit that you mentioned that you guys had just built. I did see a sleeping wombat in a log, and I did see the tree. I did see the tree kangaroo. So that was it. So I did see that there, it's possible you can see them. But I thought it was really cool because you almost felt like, excuse me, you almost felt like you were like walking through their backyard, like you were saying, because everything was so natural. And you're like, should I, like, you've almost felt like you were disturbing them because you're like, oh, these guys are nocturnal and, I don't want to be waking them up or anything, but it was really cool. And, again, for skeptics or for people that feel some kind of way, I would just say, do your research. Because yes, 100 years ago, animals were treated completely differently, but that's also because we didn't have a hell of a lot of education going on either. Back when people were capturing these animals and putting them on display, they weren't doing any research. They certainly weren't going and checking out what their lives were like in their natural habitats before bringing them over here. It was just more, kind of like Ansel Adams photography. Like everybody shared his photos so that they didn't have to travel to these places because they probably wouldn't get the chance. So it was the same thing. Well, we're never going to see these animals. I'm not going to Africa, before I die. So let's check out this cheetah at the zoo. So that's how it all started. And thankfully, the conservation side has taken more of a forefront, and the education is great, but those zoos putting funds back into conservation and trying to keep those animal populations within their own natural habitat alive and thriving is also so very important as well. So, just do your research, guys. Don't shun it.
Such a huge part of the industry is, giving back to conservation, giving back to our, native species and the populations out there and raising education. Like, it's certainly not just about entertainment or just bringing people in to see an animal, jumping, doing tricks. Like it's a lot bigger picture than that. And zoos are, one of the biggest contributors to conservation efforts and stuff. So,
and I'll point out too that, and I'll point out as well that a lot of animals do live longer in captivity, obviously depending on the animal. But for example, Lone Pine has the oldest male platypus on record.
Yeah.
In his habitat, and he's doing all right. So it's, things, hearing
platypus who, he's 25 this year, which is very, very old. And for a long time, we've known that he's the oldest male platypus in human care. He was actually one of the very first platypus born as part of a captive breeding program. So he sort of jump-started, what does it mean to breed platypus and how can we get more and what can we learn about them? But they recently did some studies and declared that they think that he's probably the oldest male platypus anywhere. So we've always known he was the oldest male platypus in a facility, but now they think that he's probably the oldest, period, which is really cool. I mean, clearly doing well by him. He's got a good little life. And there are a few female platypus in facilities down south that are nearing their 30s. So, and same with koalas. Koalas live 8 to 10 years in the wild, and ours regularly live upwards of 15. We've got 2 females that are 17 this year. The oldest koala we ever had lived to 23, which is about triple her life expectancy.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
They have no predators. They're guaranteed great food every day. Even if there's a drought or a fire, we will feed them the best leaf possible. And, and if things that really hit koalas hard in the wild, like losing their tooth condition and not being able to eat leaf anymore, those are all things we can supplement. We can give them other things. They have really great vet care. And they're not just, sitting in their exhibit, just pacing, like they are, showing us their natural behaviors and moving and interacting with each other and eating. And it's just, I just love my job. God, what a great job.
I love it. Well, and again, and I will say, as you mentioned before, like the animals set the tone, the animals set the pace. You guys do what the animals want to do it. And I was told that when I went to the Australia Zoo, and again, I went to the Australia Zoo prior to the Lone Pine Sanctuary. So when I went there, my very first encounter there was with a wombat named Burrow. She was 20 years old. And they told us flat out, they were like, listen, she knows what the deal is. These are her daily walks. You're just happy to be a part of it. Once the food runs out, she's going to peace out. There's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing we're going to do about it because this is her time. And sure as shit, once her snacks were gone, she was like, nice meeting you. I have things to do, people to see. And she was out.
Yeah. And I run platypus encounters and the platypus don't even come out. And I'm like, sorry, guys. Like, you got to see behind the scenes. We got to talk a little more in depth, like hope that was worth it. And, you've given back to the sanctuary, but you can't control them and we don't want to control them. So unfortunately, most people are animal lovers and they have the best intentions and they get it. But sometimes you do get people that are really mad that the animal hasn't come out and performed for them. And it's like, well, sorry.
Well, again, with the owl experience encounter. Thank you. I'm like incursion, encounter. What are we calling it? One of the barking owls was an older female, and you guys told me flat out, you were like, listen, you can pet her, but she's not going to go on your hand. She has no interest in being held, and she's not playing around anymore. She's an old lady, and she just she's happy to say hi, but that's about it. And then again, when I met Noddy, the koala, and held him, you guys said the same thing. You were like, listen, he might be down. He might decide halfway through the photos that he's over it. And then we'll try and get another koala for the other people that didn't get their photos, whatever. But you just have to respect the animals and we're on their time. So I do appreciate that you guys all made that extremely clear. Because that's what you hope for, right?
Like we've conditioned, our koalas are trained that, when we go in to take them out for an experience, they know that they're going to sit on our arm in a certain way. And so kind of as soon as we enter and hold their hands, they know to move into that position. And because they've undergone that conditioning, they do have sort of this option to say no, because they know exactly what's happening. So if they're not doing their part of it, it's like, well, what's happening and you're rebelling. So clearly you don't want to do it. And so, we'll go to the little roster. We've got a little roster of who's on each day. Koalas can only work for 30 minutes a day, 3 days in a row. So we know exactly who's working and how long they can be out and which experience.
I was really impressed by that. It reminded me of the rules of child actors where I was you guys were flat. Yeah. You guys were flat out no, this koala is done for the week. This one, it was just so cool. I'm like, wow, they're on this really regimented schedule.
Doing that little motion of sitting on our arm, then we'll go and take them off the roster for the day. And conditioning to that movement and that experience allows them to, say not today, but generally kind of as soon as you go in, they sort of sit right into it. And we try to give them, lots of really good leaf and really short, sweet experiences. It's good they can only be out 30 minutes a day because it just keeps it really positive and not super overwhelming. But, most of them just eat the whole time. And some of them fall asleep on people and that's
awesome.
Be particularly fussed. And if they do, then give them a bit of a break. So always
reading the animals. And so again, Lone Pine has a myriad of animals. So they have wombats, they have kangaroos, they have wallabies, they have tree kangaroos, they have barnyard animals, they have a variety of birds, they have y'all love your lizards down there. You got a variety of lizards. But I do want to talk. So anyone who follows me on Facebook, who's friends with me on Facebook, knows that I did I think a pretty good job of summarizing every single day that I was in Australia. And I did give a lot of educational information about what I learned from each animal experience. But I do want to talk about the koalas just for my listeners that maybe have not read that or don't know about it, because I think it's really interesting what you guys do. And also, just people are ignorant out there. So everybody has that whole chlamydia joke. Let's talk about that with koalas. Chlamydia is rampant.
Yeah,
with koalas.
It is. So a lot of koalas are suffering from koala chlamydia. It is not the same as human chlamydia. I repeat, if nobody takes anything else from this podcast episode, you cannot get chlamydia from a koala. If you hold a koala, if you care for a koala, if you touch a koala, you will not get koala chlamydia. So yeah, it's a totally different strain of chlamydia. It is not the same as ours, but it does affect them in some similar ways. So it does affect their reproductive system, can also affect their eyes. So yeah, there are some koala populations in the wild that estimates say like 80% of them are suffering from chlamydia. And unfortunately, chlamydia sort of impacts them twofold. So it, one, makes the koala that has the chlamydia really sick. And but two, it also means that they are generally become sterile and unable to reproduce. So not only is it affecting the current population, but it's preventing the next generation from, existing. Right. So yeah, it is a bit scary when you think of how few koalas are out there. And then if upwards of 80% of them are affected with chlamydia, like what does that mean for the next generation? So yeah, we at Lone Pine have a chlamydia-free population, but we have had, a handful of koalas come in with chlamydia. And unfortunately, in order to treat that infection, it generally does involve removing their reproductive organs. So they won't be able to breed, but they have a safe place to live. They can serve as ambassadors to teach animals about, the condition and how to spot it and how to call for help and, what symptoms to look for if you see a koala out in the wild. And so, yeah, it is rampant. So koala chlamydia is not a myth, but it's not something you're going to get or catch from them. And most populations in human care are chlamydia free because obviously, if we had a wild koala or a rescue that came in with chlamydia and then we put them into our population, that would be really detrimental. So they generally go through a quarantine period until they've fully cleared the infection before they can even be introduced to the main part of the sanctuary. So.
Yeah. And I think when I was there, you did have some that were in quarantine. They were in their own little spot away from the rest of the population. But let's also talk about, so they eat eucalyptus. I did not know there's a ton of varieties of eucalyptus. And contrary to popular belief, they don't get the koalas high, you guys. The koalas are not high. However, eucalyptus is actually poisonous to them. So kind of explain that, because I was fascinated by this.
People clearly think koalas are just partying, like they're having these,
yeah, they're just stoners.
Yeah. And they're stoners. Like, guys, koalas sleep 20 hours a day. Like they don't have time for fun. So there are hundreds, nearly 1,000 species of eucalyptus out there. So it's a pretty general term when we say koalas eat eucalyptus. They actually eat a very small portion of the species. So they eat maybe 50 or 60 different species. And that's depending on where the koala lives. So each koala individually probably has, maybe 12 species or so that they will actually regularly eat. So we harvest about 1,000 pounds of leaf every single day from our plantations, and they get fed every day, but they are not stoned or high off of the leaf. They are sleeping because all they eat is leaves. So if you only ate spinach and you had to climb a tree to get it, you would be very tired as well. So they expend a lot more energy than they get. And eucalyptus leaf is about 50% water. So they get most of their water content from the leaf. It's quite rare to see a koala drinking water. And it's about 30% fiber, which means they do produce about 150 poops a day. So a lot of sleeping, a lot of pooping. But yeah, generally, if they're awake, they're eating and then they sleep the rest of the day. The great thing about eating eucalyptus is there's a lot of eucalyptus in Australia, so they don't have a lot of competition. So it's a great adaptation that they can eat it because there's not many other animals eating it. But yeah, the downfall is that it's not a super nutritious leaf. So they don't have a lot of energy for doing much else.
There's no carbo loading going on. Yeah.
There's no carbo loading for koalas. It is a toxic leaf. So most animals can't eat eucalyptus, which again means that there's very little competition for the koalas. But they actually have adapted to be able to eat the leaf. They need to have a special bacteria in their gut in order to digest the leaf and not be affected by those toxins. And the way that they get that bacteria into their systems is when they're tiny little joeys and they're just starting to come out of the pouch, they eat their mother's poop. So that's a nice first meal, intro to the world. But that poo is full of all of those healthy little bacteria, and it really helps their gut biome. And so they do that a handful of times, and then their stomachs are strong enough to start eating leaf. But koala poo is pretty special. Sometimes if we get sick koalas, from the wild that aren't used to our leaf species, or they are, they're showing us lots of diarrhea and not digesting the leaf or something, we will make, they'll make little like poo milkshakes and poo paste from healthy koalas and share it with the other ones. So they eat it as joeys, and then they eat it if they're sick. So it's pretty gross, but it's also pretty cool that that's an option, and harness the power of that koala poo.
Yeah. Well, and again, that just goes to show why, places like the sanctuary were so important. Because like you said, when all of that fur trade business was happening and you were taking in so many joeys and so many babies that didn't have that, and you guys were there to help facilitate that, to make it possible for them to be able to digest the eucalyptus as they develop. So again, conservation is so important, and is pretty much at the forefront of the majority of obviously for the sanctuaries, but for the majority of major zoos as well. I know, again, zoos started out as for profit. A lot of them still are, but they recognize that they don't have a business if these animals no longer exist. So they got into the business of conservation, and the more educated people can be about these things, which is why, I wanted to share the funny stories too, because when you can kind of connect that, because listen, how many kids are going to go home and talk about koala eating poop? You know what I mean? Like it's a conversation starter. It gets people interested. It gets people in the door, because they're like, oh, I heard this about the poop. And then, then they learn other things through those kinds of stories. So I think it's all really important. And that's why I wanted to share that and have this conversation. Just can't help myself. But I will say that when we were talking about the platypus, so you guys have two male platypus at the sanctuary. And the sad thing is the guide that had shown us around, I apologize, I forget her name, but she's obsessed with platypus, and she's never been able to touch one. And I thought I'm like, wait, what?
Our platypus are both males, and male platypus are actually venomous. They're one of the only venomous mammals. So they have this little spur on their back legs, and they will get on top of other males to defend their territory and spur them and inject venom. And so if we, pick them up or try to touch them or hold them, the risk of getting envenomated is too high. So only our mammal keepers handle them, and they've got specific ways to handle them where they're not at risk of the spurs. But those back legs can sort of twist like a wrist and move inwards. So they're pretty flexible with them. So we do have one person on my team she's a platypus expert. She knows so much about them. She just talks on them online, and she's never been able to touch our platypus because we're not allowed to. We can't risk it. The good thing about working in a facility like Lone Pine, where we have so many animals and we have quite a small team, if you go to bigger zoos, they might have 30 people looking after, the African rhinos and giraffes. And whereas we have, 100 staff in total. So everybody knows each other. Everybody helps out in different departments. Everybody's friends with each other. So the good thing is, often if, an animal is under anesthesia because maybe they're getting microchipped or they're undergoing a health check, sometimes they will say, oh, I know this person loves a platypus. And so they might radio you and say, you can come see the platypus while they're under and have a good look at their bill and their feet and the things you don't normally get to see really close. So we just recently got our tree kangaroo, and I love tree kangaroos. So when he first came in and was getting his first health check, they let me come and feel his hands and his feet. They were so squishy and feel what his fur felt like and look at his teeth. And it was cool because now when I'm giving tours, I can say they have really squishy hands, which helps them climb. People ask a lot, what do they feel like? So, this animal's really soft, or this animal's quite coarse. And we do. Yeah. Poor Rachel. She's never gone to touch a platypus.
Maybe one day. But again, but again, that just goes to show how important the animals are to you guys, because anyone else you're thinking, well, it's never leaving the sanctuary. So why can't you just remove the barb and eliminate the problem? Because you guys are like, no, they're not playthings. They're not here to be handled. They're here to be protected. They're here to live their best lives as long as we have them. So things like that, I'm sure wouldn't even have occurred to anyone, because that's the animal. That's what they come with. That's who they are. Just like you're not going to remove fangs from a venomous snake that's on display. So I just think, it's unfortunate but safety first. And I will say, one of the cool things that was mentioned during that experience as well was that, some people had said, like, you might experience platypus in the wild. If you do, always assume that they're a male, because you don't have any way of knowing the difference, because the females do have a barb, but it's not venomous, or they don't have a barb at all.
Born with a barb, but
but it's not venomous.
Yeah, it eventually falls off. So generally a fully grown female that barb, but
again, on first approach, you don't know, so it's always err on the side of caution, which I appreciated that little message as well. Not that I was like traipsing around people's backyards or in certain wildlife areas in Australia, but you never know. They do have koala crossing signs. They do have kangaroo crossing signs. I did see kangaroos in the wild, which was really amazing to me. So it's a thing. But I want to talk about your first time coming out to Australia. Again, as an American, and you've been in so many different places in America, so you've kind of seen it all. For me, what really struck me was how clean it was, how strong the infrastructure was. Clearly, the roads are very well maintained, the sidewalks are taken care of, all of that stuff that you would think you'd see in a major city. But I live near a major city. I go to New York City all the time, and it don't look like that. So what were some of the things that you were kind of pleasantly surprised by, but then maybe also a little like, let's talk about this, because you might know. I'm fascinated. And I talked about this before. I'm fascinated about the Diet Coke situation. So you guys haven't had Diet Pepsi for like a decade. You have Pepsi Max. Now you're doing away with Diet Coke. However, all of the McDonald's are switching Sprite to Diet Sprite. So I'm very confused about, like, why are we doing away with diet sodas, but yet in this one regard we're keeping is it because Sprite doesn't have like a Sprite Zero? Or I think they do.
Look, I don't have the answers. I do have my opinions and my experience, but I don't know what they're doing. So when I lived in the US, I drank a Diet Coke every day. Like, Diet Coke was life. And then I moved here, and the Diet Coke just like wasn't exactly the same. So I just wasn't on board. I was like, I don't know that you guys have quite got it. And then shortly after, they started getting really into, it was called Coke Zero for a while. Yeah. It was called Coke No Sugar, which is like, if someone's taking your order and they're like, what do you want? And you're like, a Coke No Sugar. It's just, that's too much to say. Make a short version. So anyways, I am now a Pepsi Max convert, which I never drank Diet Pepsi in the US because I was a Diet Coke drinker, but Pepsi Max actually tastes better to me here. So I am now a Pepsi Max a day girl. But yeah, I guess I've never had Diet Pepsi here. Is Pepsi Max different, or just has a different name? I don't know.
It's different. Yeah.
Well, I like it. And then Diet Coke is hard to come by, but Coke No Sugar is everywhere, but it's not that good. Sorry, Coke.
They're doing fine.
I don't know what's going on there. That's just, oh my gosh. You find things you love here and then they just go away. Like, it's very,
so I mentioned Tony and Ryan to you. They came to the States last year, and apparently, so Australia does not have half and half. So they were introduced to half, but coffee is a huge thing in Australia. It's huge. Yeah. And apparently apparently all the coffee in America tastes burnt, which I'm not a coffee drinker, so I don't have this experience. I don't know anything. Yeah. But so they discovered half and half when coming to the States, and they were like, my God, why does Australia not have this? So it's just so funny to me. But like you were saying about the name, like, you guys don't say ketchup out there. It's tomato sauce or, but I couldn't. Yes. So every time I would like go anywhere and they would be like, do you want any sauce? I didn't want to say tomato
And you'd be like,
sauce. And I didn't,
"Oh," like
no, I would put on an accent just to say that because it just
right.
sounded funny to me, like saying just tomato sauce. Like it's like, oh, can I have some tomato sauce? So I would say it like that. And I'm sure I sounded like a jerk off, but it's just those kind of little
Yeah, I
stupid
just think
cultural
of
things.
sauce as something different, like barbecue
Right.
sauce or something. I don't know. Sauce is like something you
Right.
pour over, and like ketchup is
Right.
something you dip in. And
Right.
yeah, it took a long time to, if they ask me for sauce, to realize they're asking if I want ketchup. And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
of course I want ketchup. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, there are so many little things. I think if you would ask me 5 years ago, I would have a lot more on the tip of my tongue, but I have lived here
Sure.
for so long that it seems so normal to me. But yeah, the lingo is different. I went home last time I was home. I was trying to help my dad. And I was like, oh, Dad, I'll take out the rubbish bins. I'll take out the rubbish bins. And my dad like stomped his foot and was like, this is a trash can. I'm like, sorry, Dad.
It's garbage. It's garbage.
Yeah. Which is funny because when Shane, my husband, lived in the US and he would say really American things, I'd be like, don't say it like that. Just say it like you. And it's so cute
Right.
when you say things Australian. And I didn't get why he, wouldn't be more Australian. But now I get it. Like it gets annoying that people constantly, pointing out that you say things different or asking.
Yeah.
They'll say, where are you from? And I'm like, I pay tax here. I'm a citizen. Like, yeah, I grew up somewhere else, but this is my home. Like,
Yeah.
so, I do like talking about where I'm from, but it is sometimes you just want to blend in. So, I say tomato and I say the last letter of the alphabet here is Z instead of Z.
Yep.
So I'll say Z, I'll say zebra,
MH.
and I kind of hate myself for it, but I kind of like don't have the energy for people to keep making fun of me. So
no.
Yeah. So a lot of the things that I think I would have been like, oh, this is so different. Like that's just become really commonplace to me now, which I never really thought I could settle this much. But for instance, because I run tours, so a little bit back to my job at Lone Pine, you can work in admin and do ticketing and reservations. You can work in wildlife where you're a keeper for a certain department. So you might be in reptiles, you might be in birds, you might be in koalas. And then you're doing the feeding and the cleaning and the healthcare. And my department is education. So we basically run anything that combines the other one. So we're combining humans with the animals. So we do tours, we do encounters, we run all the school groups that book in, we take animals out. So we've got like partnerships with some of the local hospitals and stuff where we'll take reptiles out there. We do virtual tours, we do nocturnal tours. So anything that sort of shares what Lone Pine is doing with members of the public, that's my team, which is cool because you get to work a little bit with every department and you've got to know about every animal because we work with so many. So yeah, in my department, there are actually quite a few Americans, so I'm not the only one. So we sort of will be like, going off with each other and have a bit of camaraderie around our Americanness. But it's funny. Yeah, there's 2 Americans in my department, so I'm not the only one. And then we've got another guy who worked overseas for a while. But yeah, these things have become quite normal and commonplace to me that used to be, so much more of a novelty. And I think it's pretty cool because I work with people from the US every day. Every day I have people on my tours from overseas. And so I get to tap into that a little bit more. But I would say, some of the really great benefits of living in Australia, like you said, it's super clean. My parents grew up in Southern California. And when they talk about living in San Diego as a kid, that's how I feel like, where I live is now. It's close to the coast. It's clean. Kids go out on their bikes, all day and they go home for dinner. You see, kids out with their friends. People can go out, I go out for runs at night and I don't feel, concerned or worried. And yeah, it just feels really safe. People are really friendly. They give you the benefit of the doubt. I don't have a dryer anymore. I just hang my clothes up in the sunshine to dry them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the temperature? What's the temperature there today?
Like we're in autumn now. So I think it's like 80 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah. So when I was there, I was in tank tops and shorts. Day. And it wasn't even though, honestly, like it had rained earlier, I think in the day. So like the humidity broke. But I was in tank tops and shorts every single day that I was there. I got home and it was pouring rain and it was like 50 degrees. we had like 2 warm days in the last month. It was raining today, and I think it was probably another 50, 55 degrees today. That groundhog done lied to us this year about early spring. It's not happening. I have not seen it yet. I don't believe it's true. I'm still putting on my winter coat to leave. It sucks. So, there's no snow anywhere in Australia, right? Like
There is if you go down south. Okay. So in Queensland, you're definitely not going to see snow. That's where I live. But if you go down to some areas of New South Wales and Victoria, and then if you go down to Tasmania, which is like our Hawaii, so it's an island. Wow. It's off the coast of Australia, but it's part of Australia. Right. You can get snow in Tasmania. So yeah, you can. But I see my friends' pictures of like skiing here in Australia. And like just the skiing run will have snow, and everything else is green and trees. Like they just created enough snow for that little run. Right. Sorry, my dog's barking. I've got new neighbors moving in, so there's lots of new noises. So, but yeah, so the definition of like a ski town or a snowy area, it seems very different. I've never seen snow in Australia, so yeah, I don't miss it. I don't need snow anymore.
Well, and also, and I've touched on this a little bit as well, but culturally, so every single thing that I had done, when I was down there, also, if you go on like websites, so again, if you go on Tony and Ryan's website, if you watch any of the sticky, videos on YouTube, especially when they're making the Aboriginal mix, when I went on the bridge walk in Sydney, they started off the bridge walk by recognizing the Aboriginal tribes, the people that were in Australia, the natives that were there first, the land that was originally owned by them. So that, and it's everywhere. So like I said, it's on Tony and Ryan's website. It's brought up in your videos on the flight prior to the safety information. It's just something that's, here in America, we would say, oh, you're shoving that down our throat. And, we're not going to, why are you trying to make us feel guilty about how we handled this? Yeah. Whereas here, it's just like, hey, we're just recognizing that they were here first and this is their land. And, like that's literally all it is. It's just recognition. And it just seems so naturally a part of the fabric and culture of the Australian people. And it's just really beautiful.
I mean, Australia still has a long way to go to make up for, a lot of years of mistreatment. And, but I do think, if you go to a play, it's called a welcome to country, where they, acknowledge whoever the traditional owners of that land were. They pay their respects to current, future, and past elders. Sometimes they'll mention what the name of the local tribe is called, or the local mob is called. And so, if you go to the theater, if you listen to a podcast, if you watch a television show that was filmed on Australian land, when I used to work at school, before we would do assemblies, we would acknowledge our native people. So, and we fly the Aboriginal flag, pretty much anywhere we fly the Australian flag, which is not everywhere the way the American flag is. Like you don't see the Australian flag just outside of people's houses. Right. I went to either. My husband comes to America and he's like, the flag is the size of our house. And I'm like, that is, wow.
But I went to the Sydney town hall and they had the Australian flag and the Aboriginal flag. I went again on the bridge climb. They had the Australian flag and the Aboriginal flag. But that also leads me into a little bit of the COVID chat I wanted to have with you too. Sticky talked about it a couple of times on their live, and it's the way COVID was handled there was clearly very differently than how it was handled in the US. But also it seemed like, well, obviously you're always going to have people who are not on board, who have their own opinions, who think their rights are being trodden on, whatever. But it seemed like the country as a whole just got on board, was like, yeah, it's inconvenient, but it's for the greater good. It's for the safety and protection of ourselves and others. So for example, there was one live that the Sticky crew did, and they had said, oh, so-and-so is not here today. He was supposed to work, but there were some COVID cases in his region. So it was like the county that he was from. They were like, I don't know what the number was, but they said, okay, hey, if you live within this county, you've got to stay home. And they
Yeah.
said he's still getting paid, even though he's not here. It is what it is. So it's unfortunate that we're not seeing him, but better safe than sorry. And that just seemed to be kind of the whole tone and vibe of like the whole country and many other countries as well. But to see it and hear it while I'm sitting here watching people, get into fist fights over masks and all the craziness that's gone on in this country during that time. What was it like for you being in that country? And I'm sure you were on board with everything, but then, seeing maybe some of the news from back home and being like, ooh, like, geez.
Yeah, I come from, my dad's a doctor and my mom's a nurse. So,
okay.
I take medicine because it makes me feel better. I get vaccines. So I was, wearing my mask, and I think I've had 6 COVID jabs now. Like, just keep jabbing me if it means I get to live my life. So,
Right.
but yeah, COVID, God, isn't it weird that we like went through that, like that was a thing in our lives and none of us could go anywhere? And what a weird part of our history. I remember my mom calling and saying, they've got this illness in Asia and you're a lot closer to Asia and keep an eye out for it. And I was like, whatever, mom, like, okay. And then, it just took over the world. COVID was hard for me, not necessarily because of like the way Australia handled COVID was great. So I was able to pretty much just live my life. But the fact that my family was living such a different version of it, because all my family is still in the US, my parents, my sister, my aunts and uncles and grandparents and cousins. And I would call home and be like, I'm going to the movies today, or, we're going out to the park. And my sister would be like, I can't leave my house. Like, and I have never felt further from home. And that was really hard. Like, I don't really get homesick. I mean, I went to college on the East Coast. My family was all in Colorado. I was only seeing them twice a year as it was. And, we visit each other as much as we can pre-COVID and post-COVID. And, technology makes it really easy to keep in touch. And of course I miss my family, but I don't get homesick. But COVID just really hit me hard because I didn't feel like I was living in a different country. I felt like I was living on a different planet. I mean, COVID was so different. And I was teaching at that time and my sister was teaching at that time. And my teaching didn't really change. We did have a very short period of time where kids learned from home, but if your parent was an essential worker, you could come in. So we still had like a third of the kids there and the other ones were doing it all online, but that lasted like only a couple of weeks before we just said, everyone can come back. Whereas my sister, they had certain kids come to school on this day and certain kids come to school on this day, and they had to rearrange their whole classroom and she had to wear a mask and they had to put dividers between everything. And she was so stressed. And I'm just doing the same thing I was always doing. Like, I have never felt more divided and separated from my family as I did. And I think part of that was also that there was literally a divide. Like, I couldn't go home. And
they had completely closed the border.
To go home if there was an emergency, I'd get on a plane and I'd be home in, a day. And, for that time period, I couldn't. My sister got married during COVID. I missed that. Then they decided they'd just have a really small wedding and have their big wedding the next year. So of course we thought everything will be better by next year. Well,
sure. Yeah.
Being so geographically far and unable to get home, but just the difference in the life we were living and the way people were responding, like you said, Australia sort of just said, this is what it is. We're going to do the best we can. And we were closed. No one could come in or out of Australia. So we were all just in it together. And it was really, really hard how different it was. And, speaking to my dad, who works in emergency medicine, and the experience he was having compared to what I was going through. But what you were saying about, them saying that there were some cases in the region. So Queensland, where I live, Australia is about the size of America. It's really big, but we only have, 26 million people. So 10% of the population of America.
And because the majority live all along the coast, right?
All along the coast.
No one really lives central. Yeah.
Okay. So we all live on the edges, and but Queensland is huge. It's like the size of Texas. I mean, maybe bigger. It is like a sixth of Australia. So it's really big. And I called my dad one day and he said, oh, why aren't you at school? And I said, well, Queensland's gone into a snap lockdown. So they would put us in these 72-hour lockdowns where you could only, go do essential things like get groceries or go to work if you had to, or go get medical care. But then other than that, you had to stay like within 5 kilometers of home if you were going to go out and exercise or anything. And so they put us in these snap lockdowns so that they could track all the cases. And then once they had gotten everybody who had been affected by whatever case they had identified, we could come out of lockdown. So I called my dad and said, oh, we've gone into a 72-hour lockdown because we had 8 new cases. And my dad said, oh, 8 cases at your school? Like he thought I meant at my workplace.
Right, right.
And I said,
like,
no, there were 8 cases in Queensland over the last 48 hours. And my dad
the size of Texas.
8 cases in all of Queensland, and you've gone into a 3-day lockdown. So that's what COVID was for us. They'd track those 8 cases. They'd say, we've called all those people. We've asked them to quarantine for 2 weeks. Everyone else go about your life. So it was hard that Australia was closed. I really like to travel. And when it's not COVID times, I try to go home at least once a year. So, but, we went to Uluru during that time. My husband and I went up to the Great Barrier Reef. We did some really cool exploring of Australia and exploring Queensland. And that was kind of cool that we got to do that. But yeah, it was really, really hard feeling so separated and just not being able to relate to my family and almost feeling guilty when I would call them and tell them what I was up to because they hadn't been able to do anything fun for months. And
but again, that was the start.
Australia was so, in America was so divided at that time. And
but again, I bring this up a lot. This is a regular theme of the podcast. I'm a big fan of regulation. I'm a big fan of government oversight. If it's for good, obviously. So that really shows you the stark difference. You were able to live your life because you would sacrifice 3 days here and there. Whereas here in America, it was like, how dare you tell me I can't go to CVS and I can't go to Walmart or what, it's
isn't that the problem with, so many of the issues in America right now? Like
100%.
Can't have guns in Australia, and therefore people aren't.
You don't have mass shootings.
Gun violence.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Well, so we are past our hour mark, but I do, if you don't mind hanging out for just a little bit, I do also want to talk.
My husband out of the house so he wouldn't distract me. So I'm here, and I was telling Elizabeth earlier that Australia really takes Easter very seriously. So today is Good Friday; it's a public holiday, so everything's closed. And then tomorrow's Easter Saturday, and then Sunday is Easter Sunday, and then Monday is Easter Monday. So it's a 4-day weekend. So everybody's on vacation and has 4 days off work. I don't know why we need 4 days for Easter, but
meanwhile, I'm working on Easter and it's also not a paid holiday, which that's always been interesting to me too. Like we get paid for Christmas, which is pagan, but a Christian holiday. But meanwhile, now we have this Catholic holiday, Easter, and we don't get paid for that, for a holiday paid for that. So it's really strange. But regardless, but I wanted to talk about cost of living because it's very much on everybody's minds. All prices are going up. Things are crazy expensive. I did talk a little bit about the value of the dollar over in Australia, where it was great for me, because it was great for me, but the difference is, y'all, from what I understand, please correct me if I'm wrong, y'all get paid appropriately, you get paid a decent wage, and then the benefits, the communal benefits, not just through your job. I mean, we're talking about universal healthcare. We're talking, all of those things come into it. So everybody's like, I can't believe you pay this much. And oh my God, da-da-da. Yeah, because at the end of the day, I'm getting all of this back. Like I'm paying into the system.
It costs me $8 to buy a bag of shredded cheese here, but I also can go to the doctor for free. So, like you balance out. When I got my first contract, my first teaching contract, I remember coming home and just being like, listen to what my wages are, listen to how much annual leave I'm entitled to, like paid annual leave, paid sick leave, listen to how much so everybody gets a superannuation fund. So like your retirement fund, and your employer puts money into that on top of your wage. So if you're getting paid, $30 an hour, it's not like you actually get $27 an hour because we're taking 3 out. It's like you get $30 an hour plus we're going to put this much into your superannuation fund. And every employer does that. When my husband worked at a donut shop at the age of 16, they started contributing to his superannuation fund. So I remember coming home and just raving to my husband about this. And he's got a friend who's a politician, and his friend was hanging out with us, and he's like, I wish you would come and talk to all of my constituents about how much you're loving your contract, because all people do is complain, and you come from another country and you just are so excited. And I will say one thing, if you you're just starting the buying a house process, probably don't change career paths to become a zookeeper, because it is not a well-paying industry. But again, I can't put a price tag on how much I just love my job. And like you said, those benefits, like I've gone to the doctor more since I moved to Australia than in my entire life in the US, because it's too much.
You can afford it. Yeah.
Expensive. And I don't even understand insurance, because I'd be in the US paying $300 a month for insurance and then go to the doctor and still have to pay. Like, what's the point? And I broke my ankle in June, and, I had an ER visit, x-rays, ultrasound, they put me in a cast. I had 5 physical therapy appointments and then follow-ups. I didn't pay for any of that. Like, knowing that you're going to be taken care of. And if there's an accident, you're entitled to healthcare. There are different, you can pay for private health, and then you can go see more specialized people, or people who, might have a better reputation. But I have an incredible general practitioner who takes great care of me physically. And, I can struggle a lot with anxiety, and she has helped me so much with my mental health, and like really gives me the time of day. And like, I have found an incredible doctor and an incredible team. And and like I said, having a superannuation fund and knowing that, that's set aside there and I don't really have to worry about it. It's just sort of taken care of. And I get, 3 times as much vacation leave and sick leave as my sister, who's a teacher in the US. And I just think, and people just seem a lot more understanding. Like, if you want to take 2 weeks off to go on vacation, I've always had bosses that are like, yeah, you work hard, you should go on vacation. And I just,
travel is very much a part of the culture out there. And I don't know if it's because you guys are so isolated, you're so far away from everything. I don't know what it is, but that's just, it seems like Australians are the most traveled people I've ever experienced, I've ever encountered, which is wonderful, but it's just wild to me. So again, I know we're running long, gang, but I do want to touch on, what was it like coming from America to Australia, deciding, yes, this is where I'm living, becoming, are you a citizen?
I am a citizen.
Okay.
I have 2 passports.
That's awesome. So what was the process like? So I have a coworker who is from the UK, and when he came over here, he was not allowed to work for 6 months. So
I think you talked about this on one of your podcasts I was listening to. I was and just like, that sucks. How hard to move to another country and not be able to work. So I came over on a partner visa. At that time, Shane and I had been together for maybe, I don't know, 3.5 years, and we were living together. And so I came over on a de facto partner. So we weren't married, but we had lived together long enough to prove that we were in a committed relationship. We were engaged by the time I got my visa, but not when I first applied for it. So we basically just had to send tons of evidence that we were a real partnership and not just, I wasn't just using him for a visa. So we sent photos, we sent statements from family and friends. We sent, we had to send financial records showing that we paid rent together. During that stint, we had to be apart when he was in between visas. We sent phone records showing that we had kept in touch during all of that. So we had to send a lease showing that we lived together, all this evidence to show we were a real couple. So it actually wasn't hard to get the visa. It was just very tedious and time consuming, just a long time to gather all the evidence and get family to write things. So I applied for that. And fortunately, when I applied, I think it cost me about $3,500 US. I just listened to one of your podcasts where you were listening to Mike. It might've been the second or third time you had him on, and you were talking about how people don't like to talk about money. And I was like, money on my podcast.
Yeah. And I talk about it. I talk about how much I spent on this trip. I talk about what my budget was. Cause to me, it's not taboo. It's just a fucking part of life. Like, we all bitch about how expensive everything is. We all bitch about how we don't make enough.
When I was teaching, I worked with a lot of people older than me. We never talked about it, but at work, my colleagues and I will be like, did you get this little raise, or how much did you get for this? I don't know. We talk about money really
because
openly.
we're all in it together. Like it sucks for everybody, and I don't know any billionaires. So I'm going to tell you that I got a coupon for this and I got a discount on that. But because, again, I'm trying to share this experience, but you've got to keep it real, because I keep telling everybody, like, the most expensive part of it was the travel, was my plane ticket. So I always make people aware, because it's like, they're like, oh, that sounds so great. And da-da-da. It's like, okay, but so budget. If you want to go, you can go, you can make it happen, but you have to budget. You have to be realistic about.
Yeah. But as you said, your dollar goes so much further. So just bring like $20 to Australia, and that'll last you, months.
True,
in
gang, truly. Come on. Yeah. It was so cool.
I submitted all my evidence. I'm really lucky because shortly after I applied, they increased the prices. And I think now it costs like 10 grand to apply for this visa. So it's pretty expensive.
But you know what? I think for America, it was that too.
Yeah. Cause once you get it, you are like just entitled. I could work the second I stepped foot in Australia. I was able to get a driver's license, a bank card. I automatically qualified for Medicare, which is our universal healthcare. So I could start going to the doctor. Right. The hardest thing was I got my visa in May, and my entry date to Australia was the middle of August. So I had 3 months to pack up my entire life. And even though we knew we were going to move, it was still like selling every piece of furniture we had, breaking our lease, getting rid of all our, you don't think of things like, what am I going to do with all my plates? Like getting rid of all that stuff and packing your entire life into 4 suitcases. I'm lucky that I was 25. I had just finished grad school. I was at a position in life where I could do that. Now, I have a real couch now, not one that I got off Craigslist, but one that I bought from a furniture store, I'm just such a different phase of life that I don't think I could do it again. But so I got my visa in May. They said, you've got to enter Australia. You've got to go through customs by the 15th of August. It was Shane's birthday. So we packed up everything in Nashville, moved back to Colorado to spend some time with my family before we moved. And then basically I was on a temporary visa for 2 years, but again, I could still work. I could still go to the doctor. I had my driver's license. Shane and I bought a car together. After 2 years, I had to send in just evidence that I was still in a relationship with Shane, because he was kind of my tie to Australia. At that point, we had gotten married. So we had our marriage certificate and everything. So then I was automatically granted a permanent resident visa, as long as you haven't, broken the law or done anything really bad in those 2 years. You basically just automatically get upgraded. And then 2 years after that, so 4 years in total, I had to live in Australia. They contacted me and said, you're eligible for citizenship. And you just fill out the paperwork, go to the test, or go to the embassy and do a in-person interview and sit a test, which the test is all about Australia. And my husband didn't know most of the answers. So it's about like the government and, which branch of the government is in charge of this. And then, a few months later, unfortunately, I got my citizenship during COVID. So I didn't get to have like a big ceremony. Usually you get to go in and, but I just did mine on a Zoom call in my kitchen. I still got like dressed up and tried to make it special, but she just said,
that's like, cool.
You agree to not be a bad person, and now you're a citizen. Like, okay, great. Then I got my citizenship letter, then I could apply for my passport. And so, it was actually, once I got that first visa, it was so seamless, everything else. And I didn't pay for anything else after that. So I didn't pay for the permanent visa. I didn't pay for the citizenship. Because I had paid for that initial one. And I've been able to work, since the day I got here, and have been eligible for all the benefits of, the only things that are different now that I'm a citizen are that I have to vote. There's compulsory voting in Australia. So if you don't vote, you get fined.
Right. You get fined. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have to vote.
I love that. Actually, I love that.
I get you. And also most of the voting polling places have a sausage sizzle. So you can like grab a hot dog on the way.
I know of the sausage sizzle. Yes.
Democracy sausage. That's what we call them. So
I love it.
I have to vote. I'm also, because Australia and New Zealand are so close, I can go work. Like I can have partnerships in New Zealand.
That's cool.
Yeah. When I travel, I like go out, like I use my American passport to enter America and my Australian passport to come back. So they probably never have any idea where I am, because I'm on 2 different passports. But I've basically had a lot of those benefits just since the second I got here, which is pretty awesome. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, and again, I wanted to share that because, there are people out there that fantasize about moving to another country and starting life over. And, I've read countless articles about like I just read an article about somebody moved to Finland after reading an article about how it's like the happiest place on earth. And, and some of the 6 things like that they like, because, you get out there, but you don't know anybody. Like, at least thankfully you had someone, you knew someone. And
I think people think Australia's like, so similar because they speak English, and that's, the foundation. Yeah. And it is. I mean, I'm lucky I moved somewhere that is pretty westernized. People do speak English, but I think 98% of my experience moving to another country has been so positive, and it is such a good place to live. But that's not to say it didn't come without its challenges. I mean, I miss a lot of important family events. I dread the day that my parents get so sick, that I know it's the end of their life, and I will have to come to terms with the fact that I spent, the last however many years living on the other side of the world. I missed my sister's wedding. Like I said before, it's sometimes hard to constantly be the outsider and constantly have people making comments about how you say things or where you're from or how you do things. It's not always easy, but I think that would come with any country I lived in. My husband and we've been together for 12 years. We've been married for 8, and we're still madly crazy about each other. So I'm really, really lucky to be in a really, really good relationship, and we have a great life together. But yeah, I mean, it's hard, and it's hard not having family. And besides family, the other things I miss the most about the US are like my favorite restaurants, which is nothing fancy. Like I miss Panera and noodles.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. Stuff. I miss country music. They're like sort of getting on board here, but just not really to the degree I would like. And I desperately miss college football. I cannot get into cricket and rugby. And I miss so badly having a team that because I went to, college in the SEC, and I just fought so hard for my team, and I miss tailgating and the whole culture. But yeah, besides family, food, football, and country music, I really am so happy.
You are American. That's so funny. That's cute. I mean, thank God you've got KFC.
I also really like that Australians, we don't tip for anything. I always tell my visitors that at Lone Pine. I'm like, do not tip people. And they cannot conceptualize that would be acceptable. And I'm like, it's not only acceptable, it's like the preferred, like, I know you feel bad, like I'm not, but yeah,
it was great. It was great for me because I never have cash on me. So I always feel horrible here because I never have cash on me. But there I was like, that's right. I don't have to worry about it. They get paid a fair wage. They're good. Like they're not dependent on me helping them out that day. So it's awesome.
It is awesome. I feel very lucky that I think of myself, 12 years ago, visiting Australia was a dream destination. And I still have times where I'm like, I can't believe I live here. And now that I'm working in the industry I'm in, I mean, at least once a day, I'll see an animal doing something really cute and be like, I cannot believe this is what I'm surrounded by, what I get to do. Like it's worked out very, very well for me. And
well, that's wonderful.
I love it. I'm very happy, and everyone come to Australia. It's a great place.
It sure is. It sure is.
Do you think you'll come back do you think you'll come another time?
Or I would love to. Well, it's for me, cause and I've talked about it. It's about budget for me. So, I still haven't visited Tommy yet in France. We're planning for 2025. That's the goal, is to visit Tommy in France. My cousins have connections in Germany, so I've been begging for them to take me out to Germany. So hopefully one of those days I get out there. There are plenty of places that I want to go. But I would love to come back. It's just, like I said, it's really about the budget. I'm very fortunate that I work in an industry where I have, as of right now, I have 4, realistically, I have about 6 weeks of vacation, given all sick time and everything else. But
that's what I get every year without
having to
gang
again.
4 weeks of leave and 2 weeks of sick leave, like at the minimum.
America is no longer a superpower, you guys. How many times do I have to say it? But yeah, no, I would love to go. And that was Dr. Miles and I had that conversation because he went out to Hawaii a couple of years back, and he thought it was going to be just a once in a lifetime thing. But he said, when I came home, I kept thinking about how I can't wait to go back. So he was like, so that's how I gauge, a good trip or a bad trip. So he's like, do you want to go back? I said, yeah, I'd love to go back.
You always want to go somewhere new, but there's always still something to see, where you've been. Like where you've been. Yeah. Places I want to go, but I have all these places I got to go back to. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and again, for someone like you, so the number one thing that all of my friends who've moved out of state have said to me is the hardest part is, again, especially being in America where we so don't have a lot of vacation time. They're like, the hardest part is every year one of our vacations is spent going back home. So that's been the hardest part for those folks. And that's always stuck in the back of my mind because I always toy with the idea of leaving. But my mom's like, you can't go. And I'm like, okay. But I always think about that because I'm like, no, I like the freedom of being able to travel and go somewhere new. So it's given me more of an appreciation of staying where I am because then I do have that availability to do that. So yeah, I would love to go back. I'd love to go to Perth. I'd love to go to Melbourne. My company that we do not name here has a facility there, but it's on the west coast of Australia. So I wasn't able to go out there and check that out. But I'd love, people always make fun of me. They're like, you go on vacation to go to your job. And I'm like, yeah, especially if it's another country. Like I want to see what they do and what it's like and, you know, what they're making. Like, yeah, I think it's cool.
So that's not gonna be your entire vacation.
Like, right. It's one day. And and people make fun of me for going to the movies too. Cause I saw the Bob Marley film when I was down there and they're like, really, you're going to, I'm like, yeah, cause it's one night. It's not the whole trip. It's one night. And I got to see a really cool old movie theater.
And what else would you do during that night? Like just sit in your hotel, eating.
I'm not going to clubs, gang. I'm 40 damn years old. I'm not going to clubs. So, but we are going to end it there. Again, I know this has been a long episode and I promise you guys, no, I'm not going to promise that. I'm going to continue to talk about Australia. But I brought up Ireland before too. We've talked about Ireland. I will say the one funny thing was, when I was in Grafton, I went and got gas and I walked into the gas station and the gal goes, "Oh, an accent. Where are you from?" And I'm thinking to myself, like, obviously America, but it's like, oh no, there's Canadians.
Yeah. People ask Canadian first here because they think that
Canadians
get insulted if you ask America first, but Americans appreciate.
That's fair.
So people constantly say to me, "Oh, are you Canadian?" And I'll say, "No, I'm American." But they generally ask Canadian first, which I think is,
you know what? Funny. I get it. I would be pissed off too. We haven't even gotten
to talk about Taylor Swift, which you went to Taylor Swift while you were in Australia, and I'm so envious because you had spare tickets, which were unheard of, and I couldn't get to Sydney.
I did.
So I don't know. Maybe you have to have me on again. I have.
Well, you've got to listen to episodes 1 and 2 of this season because I do go into it. We do talk about it, and we are Facebook friends, so you can go back and you can see my post about that. I do mention you in my post the day that I went to Lone Pine. Oh, good.
Too.
Yeah, good.
I scrolled down to see what you said about Lone Pine.
And you were like, damn, stalker. Okay. Like you're obsessed with me.
As well. So I was like, I hope she doesn't be like, this was my favorite zoo and not this one. But you didn't.
Oh my, like, no, honestly, the care and the education I got with every experience, but both Sydney. Well, and again, the thing with Sydney Zoo was everybody was like, oh, Taronga. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to Taronga. Like they made me feel like the Sydney Zoo was going to be an absolute shit experience. But I'm like, first of all, it was good enough for Taylor Swift. She was there 2 days before I was. Yeah. But it was great. Twice.
She went to the Sydney Zoo 2 days in a row.
See? Well, because she's got money like that. If I could have afforded every experience, I would have been there 2 days in a row too. But I had to really pick and choose my experiences because y'all, it's expensive to do stuff out there. Again, not as expensive using American money, but like here, for example, like I go to the Atlanta Zoo and it costs $3 to feed a giraffe, but you come here and it's like $65 to feed a giraffe in Australia.
Yeah.
So it's, and I'm like, how much more expensive is the lettuce? What the fuck? But, we've gone long. This is the longest episode I've ever had.
I'm sorry.
Don't be.
The longest episode.
Yeah, don't be sorry. I would love to have you back. We are Facebook friends. We text every so often. So yes, I will definitely keep in touch with you. It'd be wonderful. And please thank your husband for making you available on your days off. I do appreciate it. Again, you guys, this was Try Not to Curse. Thank you so much for joining us. The first interview of season 2. We have a lot in store this year. So keep coming back. Thanks so much.
Bye.